This is the 10-Minute Contrarian Podcast. This is VP. We are a solutions-based podcast, diving into the world of contrarian investing and alternative finance. You can find us hosted on the No Nonsense Forex YouTube channel, NoNonsenseForex.com, and podcast players everywhere. Episode 201 is brought to us by Blueberry Markets. That's right. Blueberry Markets has TradingView now, and they're having a special promotion that is open to my listeners. Check this out. There are specific instructions, and I have every link you will ever need down below in the show notes. You must be outside of the United States to participate in this promotion. Do not get mad at me or Blueberry. Blame your government. But Blueberry Markets is giving away 3 months of TradingView Premium for free, and here is all you have to do. I made this very easy. Click the link down below that says, for the Blueberry promotion, go here. It will take you to a special page on NoNonsenseForex.com, and all the very easy instructions for current members and non-members will all be right there in front of you. If you do this, Blueberry Markets will give you TradingView Premium for 3 months for free. Simple as that. Enjoy. It is the 10-Minute Contrarian Podcast, and this is episode 201, and what I'm attempting to do here is make sure we are properly set up for the next 100 episodes. And you've heard me say this a lot probably in the past 10 episodes. We have a lot of new listeners here. And this is really common. If you think about it, out of your entire podcast lineup, how many of those podcasts did you start listening to on their very first episode? Maybe none of them. The vast majority of people don't join on episode 1. They join somewhere else along the way. And my numbers indicate that this is happening quite a bit now. So what I want to do in this episode, and then also next week's episode, is explain the importance, the dire, necessary importance of being a contrarian in this world. And then what we're going to do more next episode is a continuation of an episode I did a while back called Us versus Them. If you are newish and have not heard that episode, you're going to want to hear it. I'm going to expand on it next week. But today's episode will focus on the need, and then next week's will focus more on how exactly we achieve what we achieve here. And we've achieved a lot. But once we do that, I will stop talking about how there's a lot of new people here, and we will just simply move on and move forward with what we do here. But I really want to get everybody on the same page first. Now, I am using words I used in the title. If you remember, can't remember the name of the episode, but I said, look, when it comes to what's going on in the world out there, you need to be an emperor, not a peasant. Emperors don't concern themselves with any of the things that peasants concern themselves with. Now, I know the term peasant is a very harsh word. Nowadays, it's a very derogatory word. But we're all adults here. I think if particular words bother you, you're probably in the wrong place. And the word peasant, I can't think of a word that illustrates better what we're going to talk about today. So stay with me here. Most people around the world, vast majority of people around the world, are financially helpless. And the world wants you this way. And this helplessness doesn't even really pertain to income so much. Poor people, yes, obviously they are. Middle class, they're certainly not free in any way. And even a lot of rich people, they are way too leveraged to one thing. And I'll tell you firsthand, I know 7- and 8-figure millionaires, I'm friends with them. And they don't always have a lot of actual money to spend. It was weird when I first discovered this. Some do, but some don't. Some of these people do concern themselves with the costs of, everyday things. And this is the exact opposite of what we are trying to achieve here on the 10-Minute Contrarian Podcast. But why do we need to be contrarian? Because, what I just stated, most people are financially helpless. But the reason this is all by design. The world does absolutely nothing in your best interest, especially when it comes to money. Why would they? Do you think they want you free, or do you think they want you helpless? Do you think they want you financially independent or financially dependent? Come on. Look around you. People are like, oh, they don't teach financial literacy in schools. Yeah, duh. Why would they? They still don't, and they still won't. Why on earth would they want you to be able to break free from the system? It makes no sense. I mean, when it comes to school, it's so obvious. Look at it. They've never once taught you to become independent of anything. Ever since you were a kid. School never taught you to break out on your own and become independent and chart your own course. Absolutely not. They teach you from day one to be a good, obedient employee. And this goes all the way through college, especially in college, really. Even the top colleges. This is why anybody who's ever gone on to do anything really great and innovate and change the world dropped out at some point. They saw it. But the world does not want you this way. They do not want you to be an emperor. They want you to be a peasant at every turn, regardless of how much money you actually end up making. They want you in that prison, and they want to program your mind as much as possible to not only be in the prison, but defend the prison to those who, how dare they, don't want to be a part of it. Crabs in a bucket. You know, if I'm farming crabs so I can eat them, I don't even have to watch the bucket to see if any of them will escape. They'll do all the work for me. I mean, if you just look country by country, the United States has always supposedly been the hotbed of entrepreneurship, but they don't teach that. They don't teach you to be that at all. You have to go find that yourself. So other countries, forget it. It's definitely not taught. And you might think, well, wouldn't it be great if they did, to where you can, produce innovators and people who can change the trajectory of your country for the better? Wouldn't it be in the country's best interest to create people like this? Yes, it would actually. It definitely would. But that's not what they want. That is not in their best interest at the end of the day. And that's going to be a big recurring theme here. Nothing, even in 2025, nothing they say or do is ever in your best interest. It's always in theirs. I mean, look at the health and obesity and pharma epidemic going on all across the Western world. Do you think they're not aware of it? Of course they are. Is it bad for society? Sure, but they don't care. They're making tons of money off of it. And then if they ever decide to fix it, it's usually one of their programs, a program that doesn't work really well and just makes the situation worse over time, and they're making money off of that too. It's all designed to take your money away from you and give it to them. That's what's really important at the end of the day. And some of you countries out there, don't even start with your free health care. Canada, UK, Denmark, it's not free. For the love of God. That is a trick they tell you to make you think that they are actually on your side. They are not. You pay for every penny of that. And depending on how much you use it, you're probably paying for other people's healthcare too. I just had this conversation with somebody the other day. They have been programmed to think that their country gives them free healthcare. I'm like, okay, so who pays the doctors? And he was like, the government. All right. Who pays the government? Taxpayers. Like, cut this shit out, guys. Now, look, if you disagree with what I just said and you want to go in the YouTube comment section, because this podcast does go to YouTube, and debate me on this, you're doing it wrong. This is peasant behavior. We'll talk about that in a moment. You may not agree with everything I say. It would probably be weird if you did. Actually, maybe less weird for some of my subscribers because, like attracts like. We all do kind of think the same way. But you understand what I'm saying. Nothing is actually done in your best interest. It's wise to make them seem like it's in your best interest, but at the end of the day, it's nothing but a scheme to have you part with your money and give it to them. And if you have any independence from any part of this system, they make less money. Yet everybody just seems to gleefully pay right into it and have their money parted from them over and over again, which is exactly the reason, contrarians, to take a contrarian mindset to almost everything, but especially finance. even after school is over, do you think anybody is doing anything in your best financial interest? Not in the mainstream, they're not. They're usually doing the opposite. Why is financial media such a reverse indicator to the people who are actually paying attention? You ever think of that? Do you think it's not on purpose at all? People are finally talking about gold these past 2 weeks, and gold finally started to go down a bit. You could almost set your watch to it. Do you really think if people wanted the populace to own gold and break free from the fiat system, you think they would tell you sooner? They wouldn't just wait until gold's had an insane run-up and then mention it at what's likely, what probably is going to be a short-term or mid-term top. Now, as far as this past one goes, I could be wrong about it, but historically, they do this almost every time. They don't tell you a good time to invest in gold. They always tell you the worst time to invest in anything they bring up. As soon as they start talking about Bitcoin is usually the time you want to take some profit. They do not operate in your best interest. They operate in their best interest at your expense. Their money has to come from somewhere. And guess where it comes from? You. And even after school, when it comes to finance and investing, their number one solution is for you to give your money to somebody else so they can manage it. Now, the way most people manage their own money, this is actually probably the best move, but they're telling you to give it to somebody who is just going to take a ton of fees from you. Again, taking money from you and putting it in their pocket, just so they can underperform the market all the time. Every year they do this. So why would anybody choose this route? Well, they do, to the tune of trillions and trillions of dollars every year. They do not want you to be financially independent. They do not want you to be in charge of the decisions you make with your money, because that is not in their best interest. It is in yours, which means it is not in theirs. Now, in order for your average person to not only catch up, but surpass the amount of money needed to become financially independent, you are going to need more outsized gains than the market can actually give you on average. But does anybody encourage this in the mainstream? No, they do the opposite. The best way to really create outsized gains in the past 10 years for sure has been with crypto. But what have they always said with crypto? It's way too risky, way too volatile. It took them forever to even begin to support crypto, and usually once they finally do that is at a top. Now, factually, they're not wrong. Crypto is risky and volatile, and most people probably should not touch it, but God forbid if you actually knew what you were doing, you could, over time, which many people have, break free from this system and no longer have to rely on them. So it's the combination of being contrarian and then also knowing what you're doing, which is the two-sided aspect of this podcast right here. But if you aren't at least thinking in a contrarian mindset, then the rest of it just simply doesn't matter. You have to get there first. And even if you're new, I would wager to say, if you clicked on a podcast called The 10-Minute Contrarian, it's almost never 10 minutes, by the way, just so you guys know, but chances are you are looking, at least, to think differently than everybody else. And I just want to let you know, not only are you in the right place, you absolutely should be thinking this way all the time. It's the only way to escape the peasantry. The system needs peasants to feed on, but that doesn't have to be you. But it's going to require you breaking free from all of that social programming which has been injected into your brain ever since you were born. And you will also have to reject the people around you who refuse to and will never break free from that programming. And yet, look, this is not easy to do. My entire life, I have been discouraged from taking the route I have taken in life by friends and family. And those are people who are generally looking out for me and wanting me to do things that are in my own best interest. Usually, not always. The whole crabs in the bucket thing does apply here sometimes too. But if anybody's going to be looking out for my own best interest, it is going to be friends and family. And they genuinely thought that I should just bite the bullet and go into restaurant management and then go home every night, grab a gun, and play Russian roulette. But I knew there was a better world out there. There was a better life out there. And it's really hard for life to truly be great and fulfilling if you are constantly tethered to a system that does not operate in your best interest on purpose. I'm not saying it's impossible, but for most people, it's highly improbable. Freedom is great. Options are great. And conversely, the lack of those two things is bloody awful. And the goal of the system is to make sure that the peasants stay in that prison, one, and two, not even realize they're in it, and then three, defend this lifestyle to anybody who, God forbid, doesn't want to be a part of it. So financially, you are going to have to do things that seem absolutely bananas to your average person. But that's great, because once you've crossed this chasm and you understand this contrarian mindset, the last thing you ever want to do is something a peasant who resides in a prison would do themselves. Now, again, there is increased risk in some cases here. In some cases, there's absolutely not. It's just like obvious shit. But we will talk next episode about how you can take things that are risky and enjoy all of that sweet upside that they give you without taking unnecessary risk. Both of these things can be true. And this is why, if you have been with this podcast since the first episode, that overall we have done really, really well. And we didn't do it by being dependent on the overall market. We went out and did it ourselves. And we beat the market badly. But it takes being contrarian and breaking away from that mindset, not just financially, but in all aspects of life, because this will also benefit you. Now, there is an obvious financial tie to what I'm about to say, but the lifestyle it gives you alone, and the peace of mind it gives you alone, and the further separation from the system it gives you alone is almost undescribable. Like, I describe and explain things for a living, and even I have a hard time putting this into words. But every single one of you needs to break free from the dependence the majority of you have from your home country. And people who don't live in the West, they already know this. I don't really need to tell them. But people who grew up in the West, so the United States, Canada, Europe, Australia, New Zealand, which is most of my audience, absolutely needs to hear this, because most of the programming has affected you so much that you still think you are living in a place that is not only great for the present, but great for the future, because you have been programmed to believe this. Now, what's a good way to make sure that you see what's actually going on as opposed to what you're being told is going on? Numbers and data and facts. And those do not bode really well for the West at all. Maybe on the surface in markets and things like that, but as we all know, the stock market is not the economy, and the stock market is not real life. If things really were as great as they're supposed to be, our countries wouldn't look the way they do, not just aesthetically, but from a societal standpoint. I mean, with all the technology we've had over the last 20 years, like they should be utopias. But they're far from it. They're collapsing. Every health, education, income metric you can find for all of these countries has done nothing but go down, and in a lot of cases go down a lot. Like, everybody collectively is fatter, sicker, deader, broker than they have ever been in the past. Like, we're going the other way. And I'm old enough to live through the 80s and the 90s and the aughts and the teens and now. And I remember a time where we were going nowhere but up. But not only are we going nowhere but down, but this has become normalized and accepted. And oh, by the way, do you guys remember my population collapse episode? Everybody should go listen to it. It was, I think, the most popular episode I've ever done. There is not a single Western country who is above that terminal 2.1 birth rate. And there has never been a country in history who has fallen below that 2.1 and then later rose above it. These countries are dying. And so far, because this is a newer phenomenon, there has not been a country out there who has really seen the full force and effect of this declining birth rate and what it can do. We are already seeing signs when it comes to the worst offenders. You got to ask yourself, is this really a future that I want to stick around for? Just to see what happens? Because I'm so patriotic to a country who has done nothing in my best interest? Of course not. It's become a world, and you guys know I'm far from a doomer. I did an entire blog of why you should never really listen to doomers because they almost never get anything right, and it's just a terrible way to live and a very incorrect way to live in a lot of cases. It's going to cost you a lot of money and time that's completely unnecessary. But what I do know is I don't know if I'll ever have kids, but if I do, I don't want them growing up in the West. Fuck that. At the very least, if I was stuck in the West because I already had some kind of ties here that I just absolutely could not break, I would 100% make sure that financially, at least, I was spread out. Now, if I was going to spread myself out too, I certainly wouldn't spread myself across a bunch of other dying Western countries. I would make sure I also had money and banking services and businesses, if I could, in places that do not or have an extremely low chance of coming after me or oppressing my finances or business in any way. At that point, I am no longer completely dependent on my Western home country. At the bare minimum, everybody should be doing that. But if you want to take it a step further, and I could not recommend this more, is to physically take yourself out of the Western world and into a country that simply treats you better. Remember what I said before, if the worst really does happen or if anything bad happens, how does it always go down? The poor get screwed first, as usual, then the middle class, what's left of it, and then rich people are generally fine. Sometimes they're not fine and they say enough of this and they get up and leave. But that's the thing. They get up and leave. And what I learned a long time ago when I read Rich Dad, Poor Dad is that even somebody who was completely broke, I could still do a lot of things that rich people did, and I absolutely should. Because what's the alternative? Do things poor people do? I've seen that world. It's a bad idea. But if you remember me saying a handful of episodes ago, is the fastest way to become rich is to earn in a Western job and then move to what I said at the time, a Latin American country. The second you step off the plane, you will at least be in the top 5% of earners, probably more. You are now, in your country, which is all that matters because that's where you live, a rich person. And you now have all sorts of lifestyle options available to you that you did not have before, not to mention all the money that you are going to save, which is the same as earning, by the way. Exact same. Thus, meaning you will only become wealthier and wealthier over time. Try doing this in a Western country. Not only will you be able to do this, but as is the theme of this episode, you will be even more separated from that system of peasantry that has purposely held you down for this long. And you know what's great as an added bonus is so many of the things that go on in those countries will not affect you hardly at all, to the point to where you don't even really care. Now, I have met nomads and expats who move to these wonderful countries and then still, they're just so miserable, they still freak out over everything, but they're really few and far between. Maybe they just need to get that out of them. I don't know. But the majority of conversations I have when we go out, it has nothing to do with what's going on back home. We just simply don't care. It doesn't affect us. This sounded really shitty when I said it, but I don't care. It's true. Back when inflation was going on, or when high levels of inflation were going on across the world a few years ago, people were asking me, I was in Mexico at the time, and I had people ask me, look, inflation's 11% out in Mexico. How is that affecting you? And I was like, how is that affecting me? It's not. Maybe your average citizen in Mexico it is, and that sucks, but I can't concern myself with them. I can only worry about myself. And 11% of jack shit is still jack shit. You know, if the carton of pasture-raised eggs that I buy for what amounts to be $2 American now costs me $2.22, I'll get by. I'll be fine. I'm paying like 40 to 50 cents on the dollar, what I would normally pay back home anyway. So things like this just don't matter. Yeah, we talked about it here on the show, the whole to-do about tariffs, that nobody had any idea what was going on. It's funny how people aren't even really talking about them anymore, but it was all anybody could talk about 2 weeks ago. And I didn't really care. It doesn't affect me. Maybe the outcome will years down the road, but again, probably not, because I don't have one business that's tied to the outcome of tariffs. And while all the peasants are sitting there yelling and screaming with their hair on fire on both sides, all I'm doing? I'm sitting back and waiting for the end of the month for my monthly candle to close. That's really all I care about. As dumb and as foolish as it is, I get why people concern themselves with all these world events. Because in a way it does affect them. Because they are stuck where they are. And they have no independence. They have no freedom. They have no latitude. They are prisoners. They are peasants. Because they were programmed not to think in a contrarian manner. They were programmed to sit there and allow a system to do things that are only in the system's best interest and not theirs. Europe, you have a CBDC coming, for Christ's sakes, which is in none of your best interests, and you're just going to sit there and allow it because a bunch of unelected people simply want it to be that way, and they love the control it gives them. Absolute control, in a lot of cases. Like, you guys get what I'm saying? You may not agree with me on every single point I made today, but can we at least all agree that the only real way to break away from all of this and give ourselves the best life possible, and thus, our families, the best lives possible, is to not only decide that we don't want this peasant lifestyle for ourselves anymore, we don't want to be a part of this prison, and the only way to break free from it is to start thinking and especially doing things the opposite of what the peasants and what the prison does. The system does absolutely nothing in your best interest. Even if it seems that way, it's all an ends to a means. If you want to start living a life to where every decision is made in your best interest, well, that is going to depend on the actions you take, for starters. But the actions you do take need to be completely contrarian to what a peasant would do. And at the very least, from a financial and lifestyle standpoint, we are here to help. And we've been doing it for 200 episodes now. To all of my long-term subscribers, thank you for taking this journey with me. Even if I was taking this journey solo, I would still do it, but it's a lot better when you have like-minded people along for the ride, for sure. But for those of you who are new or relatively new, welcome. This is how we think. This is what we do. It's not always the easiest way to think. It's not always the easiest things to do. You have to break free from a lot of programming that has been instilled in you ever since you were a small child. It's not easy to do, man. I get it. But for almost all of us, it's the only way. But the bright side, too, is if you're so worried about what other people think, I can say from my own experience that a lot of times I'll tell people what I'm doing, which, is debatable whether you should do that or not, but, I feel like I got to tell somebody. And the pushback that I get from them over time goes away once the results start coming to the surface. And then sometimes those people even go as far as to swallow their own egos and not only make fun of me for the choices I've made, but then ask me how they can do it themselves. Because, and you're going to have to start getting used to this, here at the 10-Minute Contrarian podcast, when you think the way we do, you just have to understand that we are not crazy. We are just early.